Picture it. A misty dawn settles over the hills of medieval Japan. Rising from the fog are silhouettes of armored warriors, their banners fluttering in the wind, their hands resting on katanas that gleam like lightning against the horizon. For centuries, these figures, the samurai, were the very core of Japanese identity. Fearsome, disciplined, and bound to an honor code that fascinated friend and foe alike. And yet, just as dramatically as they rose into power, they also fell. By the end of the 19th century, the samurai code was dismantled, their rights stripped away, their swords forbidden by law. In their place stood a new Japan, modern, industrial, global, that had little space for an ancient warrior elite. How did the samurai ascend from simple retainers to the ruling class of one of the world's great civilizations? And how did centuries of supremacy unravel in a matter of decades? The samurai did not begin as legends. Their origin lies in the fractures of early Japanese politics during the 8th and 9th centuries in the Heian period. At that time, Japan was ruled, at least in theory, by emperors in the capital of Kyoto. But in practice, noble aristocrats often handled day-to-day authority, protected by the prestige of imperial tradition. Outside Kyoto, however, things were not so orderly. In the provinces, families needed defense against bandits, rebellions, and rival clans. And so, they hired warriors on horseback, skilled archers, loyal swordsmen, to guard their estates. At first, these warriors were little more than mercenaries. Their status was not yet noble. In fact, many were of humble birth. But over years of service, their roles grew. Wealthy clans realized that instead of relying directly on Kyoto's distant nobles, they could empower their own armed families. These warriors became more settled, rooted in land themselves, and increasingly independent of the capital's influence. An important detail here: the early samurai were mounted warriors, skilled with the bow before they were known for the sword. In fact, one of the early ideals of samurai combat was Kyuba no Michi, the way of the horse and bow. So the first seeds of samurai identity rested on regional defense, family loyalty, and martial skill. Ironically, this provincial role was what allowed them to one day seize national power. By the late Heian period, 11th to 12th centuries, two clans rose to prominence: the Taira and the Minamoto. Their clashes culminated in the legendary Genpei War, 1180 to 1185. A struggle remembered in epic battle tales like the tale of the Heian. Vivid animation might show samurai archers riding knee to knee through swirling dust, great naval battles with flaming arrows raining down on wooden ships. The war climaxed in the Battle of Dan no Yura, 1185, where Minamoto forces crushed the Taira in a dramatic naval showdown. The boy emperor Antoku, a Taira, is said to have drowned with the clan's family treasures, a scene as tragic as any Greek myth. Minamoto no Yoritamo emerged as victor, and in doing so, he fundamentally reshaped Japan. He established the first shogunate, or military government, in Kamakura in 1192. While the emperor remained a ceremonial figure in Kyoto, the true reins of power now rested with the shogun and his samurai. This was the true rise moment. The samurai were no longer just provincial watchmen. They had become the ruling class of Japan. They controlled land, armies, and politics. They were administrators, generals, and cultural patrons. Over the next centuries, their influence spread deeper. Samurai developed strict codes of service. Loyalty to one's lord became the highest virtue. This loyalty was balanced by expectations of personal honor, bravery in combat, and if necessary, a willingness to die rather than betray one's values. This developing code, later romanticized as Bushido, the way of the warrior, was shaped by multiple philosophies. Shinto taught reverence for ancestors and ritual purity. Zen Buddhism introduced discipline and meditations on life and death. Confucianism stressed loyalty, hierarchy, and order. And beneath these ideals, the samurai's weapons became symbols of their souls. The katana, perfected by Japanese swordsmiths in curves of folded steel, rose as both tool and spiritual icon. Samurai were taught that their sword was inseparable from their honor. By the 14th century, samurai culture was embedded in Japan, not only militarily, but artistically, supporting poetry, landscape gardens, calligraphy, and architecture. The rise was complete. The centuries that followed were turbulent. Japan fractured into rival domains during the Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period, 1467 to 1603. Samurai clans warred endlessly, over villages, over provinces, over ultimate supremacy. Striking visuals, samurai banners of red, white, and black filling battlefields, castles rising atop hills, muskets arriving with Portuguese traders, reshaping combat. Out of this carnage rose three great unifiers. Oda Nobunaga, who crushed rivals with ruthless efficiency. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who consolidated Japan under centralized rule. Tokugawa Ieyasu, who finally established lasting peace in 1603 with the Tokugawa shogunate in Edo, modern Tokyo. The Tokugawa peace lasted over 250 years, the longest continuous peace in Japanese history. What did this mean for the samurai? They thrived at first. Elevated officially as the ruling class, they received rice stipends and wielded hereditary privilege. They alone could carry swords in public. They became administrators, judges, and overseers of domains. But paradoxically, peace began to erode their identity. Samurai were warriors without wars. Their swords remained at their sides, but their daily battles were fought with ink and paper, not steel. Still, their cultural prestige grew. They embodied ideals of restraint, discipline, and dignity. Works like Hagakure, a manual on Bushido written in the 18th century, emphasized that death in service to one's lord was preferable to dishonor. Imagery, a samurai performing the solemn ritual of seppuku, ritual suicide to preserve honor, contrasted with scenes of bureaucratic, scholarly duties in Edo. For centuries, this system appeared stable. The samurai were the rulers of a tightly disciplined society, but history rarely allows power to remain still. As the Tokugawa era wore on, cracks appeared. Samurai relied on rice stipends set centuries earlier, but inflation and economic changes rendered these insufficient. Many samurai fell into debt to the very merchant class they officially looked down upon. This inversion of the social hierarchy seeded quiet resentment. Generations were being trained for war that never came. Some samurai became cultured scholars, artists, or poets. Others idled, their privileges increasingly questioned by commoners. The prestige of carrying swords sometimes blurred into arrogance. What, people asked, was the point of warriors in a world without conflict? The true breaking point came in 1853. American Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with a fleet of black ships, demanding Japan end its centuries of isolation. The shock was immense. Western firepower and technology utterly dwarfed Japan's. To resist colonization, Japan would have to modernize. And modernization spelled danger for the samurai. In 1868, reformers overthrew the Tokugawa shogunate and restored the emperor to direct authority. This moment, the Meiji Restoration, marked Japan's pivot into the modern, industrial world. The new leaders aggressively centralized power, modernized the military, and built industries to stand toe-to-toe with Western empires. For the samurai, this was catastrophe. Their stipends were abolished, their caste privileges erased, their swords forbidden by the Heitoriai Edict of 1876. A new conscripted army, ordinary peasants, armed with rifles and cannons, made the hereditary warrior class obsolete. Not all samurai accepted this quietly. The most famous resistance was the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Seigo Takamori, himself a respected former samurai. Tens of thousands joined him to fight against the imperial army. The rebellion symbolized the old versus the new, katanas and traditional charges against rifles, Gatling guns, and artillery. The samurai fought bravely, romantically, even, but they were decisively defeated. Seigo fell in battle, becoming, in time, a tragic folk hero. With him died not only an uprising, but the last hope of the samurai restoring their power. Though their official role ended, the samurai spirit lingered. Their imagery, the stoic warrior, the katana shine, the code of Bushido, became woven into Japan's cultural fabric. Artists, novelists, filmmakers, and later global media all elevated the samurai into a romantic archetype. Think of scenes of lone warriors walking beneath cherry blossoms, their swords carried with quiet dignity. These images, though sometimes exaggerated, ensure the samurai never vanish from imagination. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, nationalist leaders even reappropriated Bushido as a framework for patriotism, loyalty to the emperor, and military obedience. The spirit of the samurai was transformed into a modern ideology with both inspiring and dangerous consequences. Today, historians ask us to look carefully. Samurai were not all noble paragons. Some are poets and philosophers. Many were bureaucrats, landlords, or ruthless enforcers. They were human beings inside a powerful social structure, no more uniform than knights in Europe. Their rise and fall reflects the contingencies of history, not destiny. The samurai story captivates us because it embodies both durability and fragility. For centuries, they seemed untouchable, anchoring Japan's government, economy, and culture. Yet when the world shifted, when guns replaced swords, when modernization outpaced tradition, they crumbled with astonishing speed. It's a reminder, institutions feel eternal until they aren't. Privilege, no matter how ancient, cannot survive unchanged forever. The legacy of the samurai continues not because their swords remain sharp, but because their story speaks to something universal. They show us how power can be both entrenched and fleeting, how ideals of duty and honor endure, even as the structures that shape them collapse. The rise and fall of the samurai is not just about warriors and battles, but about the tension between tradition and change. When we picture them today, in armor beneath a cherry tree, or in quiet meditation before a blade, we're not only imagining Japan's past, we are looking at ourselves, recognizing that even the most powerful identities must adapt or vanish. The samurai remind us that history is never still, and that no matter how sharp the sword, time carves a sharper blade.